Let's talk about fear. We've all got a lot of it and we all want to find a way of having a little bit less of it. In this video I'm going to talk about fear and how we can do a few things to just have a little bit less fear as we're going about our daily lives. It's pretty important now because of the pandemic, but it's something that we all need to address quite a lot of the time.
But what is fear? Fear is an agitated emotional state that we have in response to things that our mind classes as potentially dangerous. They might not actually be dangerous, but our mind classes them as potentially dangerous. For example, if you watch a horror film, you might be very frightened. The horror film can't actually harm you, but your mind still thinks that it might be harmed. And fear is the reaction to things which the mind thinks might harm us. And what fear does is it pumps us up. It makes us ready to fight or to flee. It gives us energy, it helps us think more quickly, and overall makes us ready for action.
Fear is necessary. For millions and millions of years, our ancestors looked a bit like this, and they spent an awful lot of their time running away from things that looked a bit like this. Very, very scary. And fear is a way of making sure that you either run very fast so that the lion doesn't eat you, or you fight very hard so that you kill the lion before it kills you and then eats you. So fear is necessary, fear is helpful in some situations. The problem we have today is that fear is no longer as necessary as it was. Most of the threats we face today are not actually going to destroy our bodies or our minds. But nevertheless, because we spent so long building up this reflex, building up this reaction that we call fear, we still employ it. Our bodies and our minds still use it, even though it's no longer as necessary as it was. So fear is still sometimes necessary. You know, the fear of falling off a building, for example, or the fear of falling onto train tracks. These are necessary fears. But a lot of the time, we have a lot more fear than we need, and we react fearfully to things that aren't actually a threat or aren't a serious threat. So what does Buddhism say about fear? First of all, Buddhism says, look at the fear. Actually just be with the fear. And we don't do this very often. We might say, oh, I'm feeling really frightened today, or I've been frightened for weeks, or I'm in terrible dread about the pandemic or whatever. But actually, as soon as fear comes along, we run the other way. And we do that either by distracting ourselves or by trying to fix the problem in a kind of practical, outward way. So let's just delve into those two a bit. So what's distraction? Distraction is, I'm really worried about coronavirus, or I'm really worried about the inspection at work, or I'm really worried that people don't like me, or I'm really worried that I'm not going to be able to get enough sleep tonight or whatever. I'll go and watch a film. Or I'll go and talk to my friend on the phone, or I'll do something else that will take the fear out of my mind. In other words, we're doing whatever we can to either pretend the fear is not there or to make the fear go away as quickly as possible. And the other action we often have is trying to fix the fear. So for example, if we're frightened about something we see on the news, we might do some research about it. You know, we might look at the statistics. How likely is it that I'm going to get coronavirus or fall off a ladder, or how likely is it that my child's going to be abducted? Yeah, heaven forbid, obviously, but we try and sort out the problem by looking into it, by reassuring ourselves that the likelihood of any of this happening is very, very low. Now, the problem with these responses is that they don't really deal with the problem. So distracting ourselves might work for a little bit. It might work for the 30 minutes or the hour or the 90 minutes that we watch television for. But after that, the fear can come back, and it probably will. Trying to fix the problem can work for a little bit, but unfortunately, even if we fix that problem, there's likely to be something else in the world that's going to scare us, because the world can be a big, scary place. Or we try and fix something and it doesn't work. We find out that actually it's quite a high likelihood that we're going to have this problem, whatever it is. So those ways don't work. But here's this for an idea. Why not just sit with the fear? I'm not talking about indulging in it or letting our thoughts kind of run away with us or ruminating on how terrible things are. I don't mean that at all. I mean just notice it, acknowledge it. Be with the fear. Because the fear wants to get noticed. You remember that ape man that we talked about earlier running away from the lion? The fear needs the ape man to notice the fear, to feel frightened, in order to get the ape man to run away or to hit the lion really hard with a big stick. The fear needs to be noticed because otherwise it can't get the reaction it feels it needs. Now, if we notice the fear, if we pay attention to it, acknowledge it, and just sit with it, even just for a few seconds or a minute or 2 minutes, this can really help because we can sort of think to ourselves, okay, here's the fear, and we sit with it, and actually it doesn't feel as bad as we thought it did. When you run away from something, you can't see it, and it becomes bigger in your mind. We're running away from our fear, we're not looking at our fear, and in our imagination, the fear is going to be a lot bigger than it actually is, usually. So the first thing is, sit with the fear, acknowledge the fear. It can be really helpful to remember that the fear is part of us, not part of the world. So you can have, say, a week where 6 days you don't feel frightened. But let's say in the middle of the week on the Wednesday, you feel really frightened about coronavirus or your child being abducted or something else that you don't normally worry about. If you feel frightened, it's good to notice that you weren't frightened yesterday and you probably won't be frightened tomorrow. And the thing that you're frightened of was there yesterday and will probably be there tomorrow. In other words, what's changed is not the outside world, it's your mind. And just realising that the fear is inside can be really helpful. Because if it's part of us, we can have more control over it. We can react to it in such a way as to reduce it. Whereas if the fear was outside us, if it was nothing to do with us, then we wouldn't have any control or any potential for control whatsoever. Now, it is good, of course, to remember that there are some fears that we should pay attention to and that we should act on. So if you're frightened of something happening immediately, if there is genuine, realistic threat, if there is a likelihood that you will be attacked imminently, then of course, reflecting on the fact that the fear is part of your own mind won't help. You know, it's not a good idea. But of course, even in those emergency situations where you have to take action and you have to act on the fear is still part of your mind. It's still part of your mind. It's just that it's a part of your mind that's reacting in a sensible way. But a lot of the time, the fear is not because of a change in circumstances. It's because of something that has triggered your particular emotional fear response. And that, just realising that, just noticing it, can be really helpful. The nature of fear itself is insubstantial. So from the Buddhist point of view, ultimately, all emotions are insubstantial. You can't pin them down, they don't have a colour, they don't have a shape, they don't have a centre, they don't have an edge. They are essentially figments of our imagination. Now that's easy to say, and actually realising that in the moment can be very difficult. But if you can meditate on fear, if you can take fear as the object of your meditation, it will become clear eventually that it's insubstantial. And again, I've said this on other videos, if you can have an experience of the insubstantiality of fear or any emotion, if you can have that experience of insubstantiality of the object once, then you can have it again. And if you can have it again, you can build on that. And if you can build on it, ultimately, you can eradicate the object. Or at least, if the object comes up, it doesn't matter because you know that it's insubstantial. It's not solid. It's not real. It's not something that can bash you over the head. It's something insubstantial, something that will go, something impermanent. There's a marvellous story. At one point in the Buddha's life, his cousin, who was very jealous of the Buddha, actually tried to kill the Buddha with a raging elephant. I kid you not, with a raging elephant. So The cousin got the elephant ready. He made it drunk first of all, and then he saw the Buddha coming and he started prodding it with sticks and beating it and really hurting it. Not surprisingly, the elephant got very angry, and then this cousin of the Buddha released the elephant in the Buddha's direction. All of the Buddha's attendants, all his monks, ran away because they were frightened. The Buddha didn't move. The Buddha stayed completely still, didn't run away, didn't react at all, just waited. And the elephant charged towards him, screaming and trampling the earth and all the rest of it. And a few steps from the Buddha, it just stopped. The elephant just stopped, and it says in the story that the elephant bowed its head out of respect for the Buddha. Now, it's often said that this was because the Buddha had great compassion. The Buddha had so much compassion the elephant could feel it. And I'm sure that's true. But another way of looking at the story is that the Buddha wasn't frightened. The Buddha had no fear. And ultimately, a Buddha has no fear because a Buddha knows that all of normal reality is insubstantial. All of normal reality is without inherent existence. And if things don't have inherent existence, you can't be harmed. Now, that's very easy to say, right? And it's going to take any of us, and definitely me, a very long time to build up that kind of confidence in the teachings to the point where I wouldn't be frightened of anything. But ultimately, Buddhism says there's no need to fear because everything, us, the world, emotions, ideas, everything is just insubstantial. It's just the play of our own minds. And that can be really quite reassuring, even if you can't actualize that, even if you can't really believe that. In the whole of your being, with the very marrow of your bones, if you like, just remembering that things are insubstantial, things are impermanent, that can really help. So we might have, say, an inspection at work, and we might feel that the inspection went badly and we'll be waiting for the results, say. Now that can be very stressful, we can be very frightened of the result, but ultimately there will be an end to the waiting, we'll get the result, good or bad, and then we'll move on in one way or another. And remembering that fear and everything in life is insubstantial can be really helpful. So there are a few thoughts on fear. I hope they're useful. If they are, please make sure that you click the like and subscribe buttons, and I hope to see you next time. Thanks very much.